Hello and welcome to CIBER Focus, your source for international business information. I'm your host, Tim Smith, and our guest today is Jay Hein. Jay is the president of Sagamore Institute, a think tank he co-founded in 2004 with U.S. Senator Dan Coats. As part of his Sagamore duties, Jay also serves as managing director of an impact investing vehicle called Commonwealth. Previously, Jay served as Deputy Assistant to President George W. Bush and Director of the White House Office of Faith-Based Initiatives. In this capacity, he advised the President and oversaw the implementation of a determined act and determined attack on need with staff at a dozen cabinet agencies. He formerly directed civil society programs at Hudson Institute and served as a welfare policy advisor to then Wisconsin Governor Tommy Thompson. Jay is also author of The Quiet Revolution, an active faith that transforms lives and communities, which was commissioned by Amazon to help launch its new faith-based division. Jay received an undergraduate degree at Eureka College and an honorary doctorate of laws from Indiana Wesleyan University. Jay, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a privilege to be on the show. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for making the trip down. We appreciate it.
Indeed. We value our strategic partnership with IU for sure.
Well, and we value our partnership with Sagamore and with you, certainly. Thanks. Sagamore's website states, our main value proposition is moving ideas into action. How are you and Sagamore Institute moving ideas into action and action into impact, both here in Indiana, in the U.S., and in the world, Jay?
Well, thank you for the question. It allows me to speak to my passion, which is to serve in the ideas industry. So much like a university, we prize research. We care a lot about how to think more deeply about the issues of the day. Many Washington, D.C. kind of think tanks turn that into ideology or partisanship. And there's, in the marketplace of ideas, a place for that, to be sure. We rather wanted to deploy good research and better thinking into action, as you cited, which really looks like entrepreneurship to us. So our model rests on the entrepreneur. That entrepreneur could be in government, they could be in the marketplace, the church, non-profits, but we're constantly on the lookout for game-changing leaders who are trying something really hard to try and fix something that's broken or build something that doesn't exist yet. So if we can use our research and our consulting services as a action-oriented think tank to help those entrepreneurs win, that's a downstream solution to pursue an innovation, but also a rich laboratory of learning, because we learn what works and what doesn't and why. So when we go back upstream to influence public policy or to inform public opinion or understanding of the issues of the day, there's some first principles or some rigor that goes into that from our research, but there's also this healthy, hard-earned experience by being in the field with the entrepreneur, which makes our counsel upstream a little more valuable, we think.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we're trying to put theory into practice through our experiential learning programs, both at the undergraduate and the graduate level, and the beneficiaries are exponentially greater. The learning is more solidified, and it just goes somewhere, right?
That's correct.
Ideas into action. So when I read that, that really excited me, because it wasn't just me reading it. I know you and your colleagues are doing it, and I've met a few that have shared how it's having impact in the world, and we need more of it, Jay.
Well, I think so too, and I think that specific line is the #1 recruiting tool for our intern program. So thinking about your student population, you know, this generation wants to roll up sleeves and be a part of meaningful action. It's a high privilege at a university and at a think tank to be able to think on the big issues of the day and to educate and to influence leaders and citizens. Of course, our founders had it in mind that the citizen would be at the center of the American experiment. And that experiment would succeed or fail based on how educated and how engaged our citizens are. So in many respects, what we're talking about here is the big job. The big job isn't in New York on Wall Street or in Washington at the Capitol. Those are very important jobs. But the big job is what we do as citizens, and to serve them and to engage them. It really is a rich privilege, but it's also, I think, the major task of a democracy. And so as a think tank, we lean pretty hard into that.
Great, thank you. Well, congratulations on your 15th anniversary for Sagamore. Hard to believe, surreal perhaps?
It is. In many respects, it's, we like to say it's our 15th anniversary and our 35th birthday.
Oh, I like it.
What I mean by that is we spun off from an existing think tank that was an experiment. So Hudson Institute in 1984 set up shop in Indiana. And Les Lankowski, who is a part of the Indiana University Center on Philanthropy, was a president of Hudson Institute during that era. He succeeded Mitch Daniels, which you may have heard about.
Of course.
With another institution in the state, a former governor. And so they were a part of an experiment, though, because particularly in the 80s, think tanks weren't out in the middle of America. They were either in DC or New York or San Francisco, but they weren't in places like Indiana. So when Hudson Institute moved here from New York, Hudson River, it got its name, it was an experiment. I joined Hudson Institute. It was a rich privilege to join the Mitch Daniels, Les Lankowski version of a think tank because they rolled up their sleeves. They're the ones who changed not only geography, but the functionality. So that's where the ideas into action came from, was their orientation, which is the fact that they wanted to be relevant. They wanted to work with policymakers on something that would actually affect change. And when you're closer to the people, it's more important to do that. So it is easier in Washington to pontificate or to do what we're doing here, having a rich conversation in some media context. And there is a meaningful role for that in a democracy. But they needed to pass the Chamber of Commerce test. You know, what are we going to do to grow this economy? And so to use our research. So Hudson Institute practiced that for 20 years, from 1984 to 2004. They decided, Hudson's leadership in 2004, to return to the Eastern Seaboard. They moved to Washington, D.C., their headquarters. So Dan Coates, who you referenced in the introduction, and I stood up Sagamore as the 21st year of that experiment. So Hudson was here 20 years. We became their 21st year because we kept what they started going, which was a national policy think tank with global reach in the heartland.
Yeah. Well, thank you for walking us through that, Jay, very much. So how about some reflections on these last 15 years? Maybe some takeaways you could share with us today as I force you to reflect on that.
Well, it's a delight to be able to do so. We've probably done 500 projects in 15 years, so just thinking about the scope and the scale of our action, I mentioned our methodology, which is to identify entrepreneurs who we want to run with and serve, is somewhere near that number, which gives us a hard job, which is explaining what Sagamore does for a living, because it's not as neat and tidy, is to say, well, we have 3 program areas and we have 20 scholars per program area. These are the white papers we produce, and we do a bit of that. But our projects range from new solutions to the energy crisis to rebuilding Rwanda post-genocide through business development, to creating a new approach to public education in Indianapolis via a charter school we help launch. And so we haven't cooked these ideas up. We've identified the entrepreneur who are pursuing these various and inspiring approaches to building a better society at home and abroad. And then we have to pass a test of whether we can add value to them. So it's sort of a negotiation. Can we be good partners here and be better together? And that's happened about 500 times. And so if we had more time, I could walk you through dozens of stories in virtually every public policy area. And that's the hard part to explain. What I could synthesize, though, is that there are some big areas that, that these projects congeal around. We have a particular focus on governors. While we were co-founded by a United States Senator, we actually prize the executive branch a little bit more than the legislative branch because governors are in the building and fixing business, less the debating business. And so we've served governors. Mitch Daniels, again, as a name drop, so he was very innovative. He was his own think tank in many respects. He was super dynamic in particular fiscal policy. So we came alongside him to help a bit, but more so to learn from what he did and then to transfer to other governors who also wanted to right their state's ship fiscally. Well, how do you do that? What's in that black box? So for us to look at a dozen different policy reforms that he produced over the 8 years he was in office, and then to unpack who were the experts and what was the enabling legislation, what type of media coverage was there, who are the, the sort of replication agents that maybe could be talked to about turning around the BMV or somehow stabilizing your state budget and creating surplus and these sort of things. And so it's really gritty work. It's not headline grabbing. But if you're a governor and you have short amount of time to do bold reform, you want to tap into a meaningful resource. And so that's an illustration of the kind of research we do. And as I said, it's far-flung in the places that we do that work. And since this is a program aimed at the international business community as well as our own state's interests, the fusion between Indiana and the nation and the globe has been dominant in our thinking and our actions since 2004 as well. I'm oftentimes asked that question, are you an Indiana think tank or a national think tank or a global think tank? And I answer yes, because we live in that world now. Indiana's a very international place.
Absolutely.
National policy matters to how we prosper. And we know that visiting cultures all across the globe, they have the same aspirations for their people that we do. Stronger economies, better educated children, and a more civil place to live.
Thank you, Jay. Much appreciated. So tell us a little bit more about Commonwealth. I know it's an important operational program of Sagamore. Share with us a little more about Commonwealth.
Sure. So Dan Coates, when we built Sagamore, he had completed his first service as a U.S. Senator from Indiana and had accepted an assignment to be U.S. Ambassador to Germany in 2001. So in 2004, when we built Sagamore, he was still over there finishing up his tenure in Berlin. And when Hudson left, I contacted him and I said, we have a problem and an opportunity. The problem is he had created a foundation that I was running for him at Hudson. And he wanted his foundation attached to an Indiana charity. And I said, we've enjoyed our time with Hudson as an Indiana charity, but they're not going to be one in a couple of months. They're going to be a District of Columbia charity. And so that's a problem. The opportunity is we could create a new new organization that would maintain deep Indiana ties. And we could even maybe fulfill that mission more fully because we would be coming from Indiana soil. So he said, please use my foundation to build Sagamore.
Okay.
That foundation has become Commonwealth. So since those early days, we've had two businesses. Dan and Marcia Coates Foundation, which was originally called the Foundation for American Renewal, and Sagamore Institute. So we had a foundation trying to finance and support community-driven solutions to the world's biggest problems, and then a think tank that was doing research and consulting to better understand these challenges, to change the environment through public policy change and other means to accelerate good solutions, and it's been a dynamic tandem. Well, when impact investing came on the horizon, and in our view 5 years ago or so, we thought that was a terrific opportunity to reconfigure the foundation into Commonwealth to solve a big problem, which is that a lot of capital is being deployed now. Hundreds of billions of dollars are now moving to this new field called impact investing. It'll be a $1 trillion market within 10 years.
Wow.
It's amazing. That's good news. The bad news is deal flow. It's so new that there aren't enough deals that produce both an economic return and a meaningful and measurable social impact. So we thought that was a terrific way for the foundation, now Commonwealth, to remedy a problem. Since we've been for 20 years in the business of building up businesses that had social impact, could we be a solution to try and accelerate high-quality deal flow, which we are actively in pursuit of.
Great, thank you for walking us through that. Much appreciated. So, I was very excited when you accepted my invitation to come down and speak with us today, Jay, and I know you care deeply about civil society, so I wanted to take a moment and talk to you a little bit about civil society. Our work in international development through IIB takes us to emerging and developing economies, and I'm always on the lookout for signs and activity to bolster civil society. I had a wonderful guest in recently who's from Russia who spoke to civil society trying to come up in this environment in which it's not necessarily been supported to do so.
That's correct.
How about moving forward? Let's bring it home back to Indiana. What else would you like to see in civil society as far as growth and opportunity to continue, because I'm seeing it as well and colleagues are validating that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about civil society, let's say here at home in Indiana. What else might Sagamore, might Indiana University be doing to contribute to that?
Sure, thank you. Well, I would take that in two dimensions. One is the citizen participation that I referenced earlier. We live in a perilous political time. There's just a rancorous politics that I think is pushing a lot of citizens away from the public square. It's just, you know, a weariness of political leaders that are seemingly more committed to division than unity. That is a big threat for our democratic experiment. So what we want to see is more active citizen participation with higher expectations, so our public officials will pursue more the common good than partisan advantage. So we think part of civil society is good civil discourse, and that should be informed. This is not that we shouldn't have debate. I think that's so healthy, but doing it the right way, and that should be informed and civil. So we think that our democratic experiment could use a little more civility. So we're committed to that, and we have an annual Indiana Conference on Citizenship and some other strategies to pursue that. The other side I just referenced vis-a-vis Commonwealth, and that is the civic sector or the nonprofit sector needs to be strengthened. It's already a beautiful part of American society. Nonprofits, you may know, can create 1 in 10 jobs in the American economy. This is very big business, and Americans give $1 billion a day. It's a remarkable, almost $400 billion we give. So in philanthropy and in nonprofit behavior, we have big business, but it's not necessarily good business because it's an irrational exchange. Philanthropic gift with the nonprofit performance doesn't have the rigor of the marketplace. Impact investing, we think, begins to instill some market discipline. So we think if we can create better businesses in our nonprofit community and better social investment in our philanthropy, that civil society as a sector will, or private volunteer organizations, will be a terrific uplift to Indiana. And this transfers internationally. I worked, you referenced in the Bush administration, we did a $15 billion aid package to Africa to combat AIDS. The President's emergency plan for AIDS relief in multiple countries across Africa. We required those dollars to pass through large organizations such as World Vision. So if we just gave it to the large NGO, they would go in, do good work, and they would leave. But if we could pass those dollars through, requiring the large organization to be an intermediary, that would be a fiscal manager, but also a trainer of the local indigenous population and NGO community, there would be a sustainable health, which is what happened. So when Ebola struck, the health systems that were built to combat AIDS 10 years previous were in place so that those communities could recover from Ebola faster. So it was a beautiful portrait of American generosity done strategically to build up indigenous assets, and we should do more of that.
Absolutely. And Jay, thank you so much for all you're sharing with us, your inspiring words and reminder of the importance of the engagement strategy, right? And putting theory into practice. And we always do it better when we do it together.
That's right. That's right, indeed.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Jay. It's been a pleasure.
All right.
Thanks.
It's a delight.
That's all the time we have for this edition of CIBER Focus. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any comments or suggestions for future topics, please let us know at CIBER, that's CIBER @indiana.edu.